Before we get into it, a bit of history. Superhero comics became very popular in the 40s, especially during World War II, to which Marvel, then Timely Comics, would enjoy great success with characters like Captain America. But the genre would fizzle out when World War II ended and other genres would gain popularity. But with the 50s, a lot of people started to blame comics for kids getting into trouble, and we got the Comics Code Authority to fix this. Genres that had gained popularity, like horror and crime, were essentially forced out, and superheroes saw a resurgence. DC, then called National Comics, was reaping most of the benefits with its characters like Batman, Superman, Flash, and of course, the Justice League. Marvel was facing not very good times and needed to cash in on this phenomenon. There's two versions of this story. Stan Lee's version and Jack Kirby's version. Stan's version goes like this. It was the early 60s and Stan was considering leaving comics entirely. Martin Goodman, the founder of Marvel, and Stan's uncle, comes to him wanting Marvel to have their own version of the Justice League with a superhero team. So Stan does it with a spin of making the characters more like real people. He goes to Jack Kirby to draw it, and we get the Fantastic Four. Jack's version is a little more salty. It was the early 60s and Marvel was struggling hard. Marvel was dying and Jack decided to roll up his sleeves and save the company by creating characters, starting with the Fantastic Four. Also, it wasn't the Justice League that inspired it, but more a takeoff of Challengers the Unknown, the sci-fi comic Jack did at DC in the 50s. Also, the whole characters being more like real people thing was completely his making, and Stan contributed basically nothing when it came to not just the Fantastic Four, but all of the 60s Marvel age. According to Jack, all Stan did was run around the Marvel offices like a chicken with his head cut off. It should be said both versions would change over time. Stan started by giving himself most of the credit, but with time would give Jack more and more. Jack's would start with him getting most of it, but it still being very much a collaborative effort, but over time giving himself more and more credit. So what's the real story? Well, it's hard to say for sure. Outside their word, the evidence shows that Jack did a lot of it, but not necessarily all. Personally, I'm inclined to believe it was a mix. It wasn't a Stan creation that Jack simply drew, or a Jack creation only that Stan just wrote his name on, but a Stan and Jack creation. Mostly Jack, but enough of that. Let's move on to the reviews. Start with the Four being hailed by Flair and causing a good bit of havoc in the process. On the low end, they scare and confuse, but they also break buildings, streets, and cars, and the Human Torch even gets into a fight with the National Guard. It's not out of the norm for superhero stories to have lots of destruction in the city, but they're not even fighting a supervillain, they're just going to a meeting. I feel like this wasn't so urgent it needed a Flair, but hey, I guess Reed was just really excited about his presentation. We then flash back to the origin of the team. Reed wants to go into space to study cosmic rays. He needs Ben to pilot it, but Ben thinks it's too dangerous. Sue begs him that if they don't, the commies will beat him to it. You know, something I love about old comics is how the communists were the bad guys. Now they're just the writers. Well, anyway, Reed gives a presentation on monsters destroying power plants all over the world and tracks it all down to Monster Isle. They fight some monsters and soon come face to face with the Mole Man, who gives his origin. He was ugly and the world rejected him, so he seeked out the land at the center of the earth, as one does. After a fight, Mole Man escapes and they seal the monsters below the surface. One of my major takeaways was how the story jumps around. We start with the Four being hailed, to the origin, to the present, to the team getting split up and seeing into their adventures, the origin of the Mole Man, and finally the final battle. It's a bit odd, but it does make for a very unique and also innovative way to tell a story in comics, which, as you'll see, is kind of a trademark of the 60s Fantastic Four. Seems the Fantastic Four have gone bad. Except it isn't really the Fantastic Four, it's shape-shifting aliens known as the Skrulls. See, they're ruining the Fantastic Four's reputation so they can eliminate Earth's strongest defenders. Yes, this is the first appearance of the Skrulls. They'll get better defined as time went on, but they're still pretty cool here. The Four get blamed for this and get imprisoned, to which they pretty easily escape. Knowing imposters are behind this, Johnny tries to lure the Skrulls to him by pretending to be one of them, pretending to be him. Despite my brain hurting from what I just said, his plan works. Johnny signals the rest of the team to come and help. They capture the imposters and go to their mothership disguised as the Skrulls disguised as them. If that wasn't weird enough for you, they convince the leader Skrull that the Earth is too dangerous to invade, using pages from other Marvel magazines like Strange Tales and Journey into Mystery. A bit of subtle product placement. They get back to Earth and they're immediately surrounded by cops as the Thing briefly turns human again. They prove their innocence by going to the Skrulls and beating them one last time. The 3 Skrulls not to harm anyone ever again, and Reed hypnotized them into thinking they were cows. Wait, weren't there 4 of them? This time around we see more of that real person thing. A lot of time is spent just showing the team bickering, mainly Ben with Reed and Johnny. Though I think this aspect gets even better in the next issue. The Fantastic Four find themselves in a magic show of the Miracle Man, who is so powerful he even outdoes the Thing in a show of strength. Mr. Fantastic relents if he were to be a supervillain, they'd have a real hard time taking him down. My dramatic irony sense is tingling. They go back and show off their new suits, which everyone but the Thing likes, especially the helmet that comes with his. The Human Torch looks at the TV excited by a giant monster statue outside the Bijou Theater. Then the giant monster statue at the Bijou Theater comes to life and disappears. Hey, remember that if from earlier? Well, it's just become an is, as the Miracle Man has turned bad and is using his powers to declare war on humanity and rob jewelry stores. The 4 show up and the Thing quickly abandons the shirt and helmet of his costume for a more familiar look. They defeat the giant monster by the Human Torch melting it, and the Miracle Man escapes with the Invisible Girl sneaking onto his ride. The rest of the team then argue and bicker as to what they should do next. Ben once again self-loathes as Reed tries to cheer him up to no avail. Ben and Johnny then start fighting with each other, ending with Johnny storming out. Meanwhile, Miracle Man makes his way back to his junkyard hideout. He finds Sue and hypnotizes her. She's forced to beckon the rest of the team into a trap. They show up, and after a car chase involving Mr. Fantastic turning himself into one of the wheels, the Human Torch turns so bright he blinds the Miracle Man. We then find out the Miracle Man never had any powers to begin with and was just a clever hypnotist. The day ends with a bit more bickering before the Human Torch quits the team and flies off. The story with the villain is the weakest part, but it's mainly the other aspects that make it interesting. The debut of the suits, the Fantastic Car, and the Baxter Building, and of course further developing the character's personality and relationships. Reed, Sue, and Ben are looking for Johnny, who ran away at the end of the last issue. Ben goes to a car garage on a hunch that proves to be right as they immediately get into a fight. Ben momentarily turns back into a human as Johnny takes the advantage to fly out. Johnny goes to the Bowery to find a place to sleep and finds an old comic book about the Submariner. The men there compare the Submariner to a guy there who's supposedly super powerful enough to rip a phone book in half. They then decide to fight the man they just said was powerful enough to rip a phone book in half because there's no way that'll end poorly. In case you're scratching your heads, the Submariner is one of Marvel's oldest characters, even predating Captain America. This is his first appearance in this new age of Marvel. Funny that it's a Human Torch who finds him, as that's the same name as another 40s Marvel character, although that one was an android. The Human Torch burns off his facial hair, revealing that it is Namor, who then goes to look for Atlantis but finds nothing but ruins because of atomic testing. Namor now seeks revenge on the surface world. Namor uses a creature called Gigantor that the military and humanity are basically powerless against until the Thing goes inside the creature with an atomic bomb. The Submariner vows to not stop until he sees the Invisible Girl and says he'll cool off if she marries him. Sue reluctantly agrees, but Johnny just makes a fire tornado sending him back into the ocean, and he vows to come back. I like how the plot actually continues from the last one with Johnny quitting, and his dynamic with Ben is interesting. Namor is a cool character and all, but I don't think I'll ever like love triangles. To me, they tend to make for cheap, boring melodrama even from good writers, and this is one that will go on for decades. In fact, it's still going. The Fantastic Four are hanging out in the Baxter Building. Johnny and Ben are fighting as usual when the power goes out and they realize a net's been dropped over the whole building. Who could be behind this? It's no other than Dr. Doom, who Reed recognizes as an old college peer whose forbidden experiments led to an explosion, disfiguring him and got him kicked out of college. One thing I negated to mention was that the reason Johnny and Ben were fighting was because Johnny said Ben looked like a character in the comic book he was reading. The Hulk. Yep, this was around the same time the Hulk was first introduced. You know, it's easy to acknowledge that this is what started it, but you never really think about the fact that the rest of the universe was branching out and growing with it. We're going to see more stuff like that as this goes on. Doom takes Sue as a hostage and captures the rest to take back to his castle. Doom explains he has a time machine and sends them back to retrieve Blackbeard's treasure chest. Once there, they get disguises, quickly get drugged onto a pirate ship, to which they quickly take control, and they're attacked by another ship. They fight them, find the treasure chest on their boat, and try to leave. They then realize that Ben is the famous Blackbeard all along, who doesn't want to leave. He wants to stay where he's respected and betrays Reed and Johnny before a twister pulls apart the ship and they make their way to shore, where Ben apologizes. Well, that was a pleasant waste of time. They go back to the present where they trick Doom. Doom only said he wanted the chest, so they emptied the chest of all its treasure. They try to beat up Doom only to find it was a robot and the real Doom is safe in another room. Doom starts to remove all the air from their room while Sue sneaks away and short-circuits the door. Sue comes to rescue of the nick of time and saves them from certain death. They debate whether to defeat Doom now, but Reed fears there's booby traps that Doom probably has all over the castle and decide to just escape instead. Johnny tries to smoke him out, but Doom just flies out with a jetpack and escapes. This is Doctor Doom's first ever appearance, and it's interesting. He'll become better as time goes on, but here he's as smart, ruthless, and formidable as he's always known to be. The planet stuff is weird, but still fun, and makes great use of these characters in this setting. This was the first 5 comics, and while I wouldn't say I find these all that interesting outside their historical context, they were fun for what they were. You can feel that Stan and Jack were getting more comfortable with these characters and their world. Jack's art is a bit more primitive in these earlier works, but it's still Jack Kirby. There's also some world building here and there that I didn't mention, like how they'll show a diagram of the Baxter building and the rooms within it. In my opinion, at least, it only gets better from here.